Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fuel Freedom's webinar, Is Energy Independence Really Possible in the U.S.? Co-founder Eyal Aronoff will be presenting the Foundation's findings, explaining the different ways to measure energy independence, what it actually means to achieve energy independence, and how it can be possible for the U.S. to become truly energy independent. At any time during the presentation, you can type in questions into the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Following the presentation, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the time allotted. Thank you very much, and now I will pass it over to Eyal Aronoff.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second in a series of webinars that we have been developing here at Fuel Freedom. Today we are going to take on a topic that has very much been on the news for quite some time, and the topic is one of energy independence. And in particular, I named this Saudi America because that's been the way energy independence in the United States have been dubbed. First of all, I really would like to thank Gal, Siti, and Nathan Taft, who did basically the legwork that enabled what we are seeing here today. They did a lot of the data mining of the DOE data and writing the paper that I'm going to present today. So, and thank you also to Mariah and the rest of the team for putting this together and making this available for you guys. Okay, so what is energy independence? Well, according to Daniel Yergin, in 2007, the U.S. was 70% energy independent. Well, if we use the same line of thought, then this year the U.S. is going to be close to 80% energy independent. It's pretty awesome, right? So how come we are paying 25% more for the energy we are consuming? So this dilemma is the thing that prompted me to make this presentation, and I hope to be able to walk you guys through our findings and explain how this is possible. Okay, so what's going on here? It's all about how you define energy independence. So what is energy? Okay, energy is measured in something called British Thermal Units, or BTU. Daniel Yergin defines energy independence as the ratio between the amount of BTU we produce to the amount of BTU we consume. So if we produced all the energy that we consumed, then we would have been, according to this definition, energy independent. So according to this logic, we produce 80% of the energy we consume. And furthermore, by looking at the data published by the EIA, which is the Department of Energy Information Administration, they collect all the data with our oil production and plus international production. By 2035, we are going to be 90% energy independent. Well, that all sounds like pretty darn good. But what about true energy independence, or 100% energy independence? Well, the IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, which is another agency than the EIA, I know it's so confusing, they go even further. They postulated that if the U.S. can continue to increase production of natural gas, coal, and oil by 10%, and parallel to that, reduce consumption by 10%, it could temporarily become energy independent by the end of the decade. And why temporarily? Because a lot of the natural gas and oil production increase that we are seeing comes from tight oil and tight gas formation, and the decline rate of this formation is very rapid. So if you think about old oil fields, say in the Permian Basin, those fields that were discovered in the early part of the 20th centuries are still producing today. But tight shale oil wells that were fracked 5 years ago are producing today only 20% of their previous production. So the decline is very, very rapid. Now let me ask you a question. Do you guys know how many BTUs you use? How much BTU does it take for you to heat your house or to drive your car? How much BTU do you use for electricity or for cooking? Well, nobody really knows. I don't know. I don't know how many BTUs. I know a lot about energy. I have no clue how many BTUs it takes for me to drive my car. And frankly, nobody cares. What we care about is the cost. How much does it cost for me to get from here to there? So it turns out that the cost of the different BTUs is radically different. So coal today goes for around $2.60 per million BTU. Natural gas goes for about $3.50 per million BTU. And what about gasoline? Goes for almost $30 per million BTU. And that's based on the current national price per gallon, which is $3.43. So as you can see, fuels, gasoline is substantially more expensive than the other forms of energy. And not only that it's more expensive just on a BTU basis, since we are using a lot more oil-based fuels than coal or natural gas, the total amount of money spent on oil-based fuels is about 82% of our total fuel expense. Okay, so we use a lot of it, and it's the most expensive product. As a result, it takes more than its equal share. Okay, does it make sense what I'm saying? So let's change the definition for what energy independence means. Let's not look at energy independence in terms of BTU, because frankly, nobody gives a damn about the BTU. Let's look at what happens in dollar amount. And in dollar amount, the picture looks very, very, very different. So as you could see, the cost of energy is dominated by the cost of oil-based fuels. So in here lies the problem. We import half of our oil. So although we are producing more energy, we are producing more oil, we are producing more gas, and a little bit more coal, the increase in oil prices more than offsets the benefit of increased production. And this really was the big eye-opener for us. It took the big recession to get a decrease in the amount of dollars we spent on import. So let's look at this graph. In blue, we're seeing the total amount of U.S. import of crude oil and petroleum products, and it's on the left-hand side. Okay? So you can see that we are reducing our imports by a very significant amount. But at the same time, we end up paying just as much. Because the reduction that we have done in import, all of it gets consumed by the increase in price. Okay, and the only exception we see is in 2009 when there was a recession. But what about all the talk of Saudi America? It couldn't be that all of this is right? People are saying articles in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the Journal, in the Economist. Okay, so let's look at the actual numbers. So here are the numbers in millions of barrels of oil per day. Okay, I'm looking for 2008 to 2012 because this is the area where we have seen the biggest increase in oil production in the United States. Okay, so the United States increased its oil production from 4.8 million barrels a day to 6.2 million barrels a day, 6.4. This is a gigantic increase. It's a miracle. It was estimated just 7 or 8 years ago that something like this could never happen. That's the peak oil theory. But here it is. It's happening. But what would it take for the United States to become Saudi America? Well, as you can see on the green bar here, we can see the Saudi Arabia oil production. And you can see that they produce about 10 million barrels of oil per day. And actually, it's been rising steadily. And probably this year, they're going to produce almost 12 million barrels of oil per day. So for us to become Saudi America, we need to double our oil production. So not only that we have increased substantially from 4 just a few years ago to over 6, we need to double it again. Now, is that possible? It might be possible if we are willing to open up, Arctic drilling, if we are willing to go ultra deep sea drilling, if we are willing to release oil from the shale in Colorado, and there are many, many other oil reserves all over. But it will take an incredible amount of capital investment to get us there. But even if we do it, we'll still have to import large portion of our oil, as you can see from the red bar here, which is our oil consumption. So the good news is our oil consumption is going down, and our oil production is going up. However, there's still a large gap to cover. And what about going forward? So in this graph, we looked at the EIA production minus consumption report. How much energy we produce versus the energy we consume. And we divided it by fuel. And unlike the graph that is provided by the EIA, we converted everything to dollar amount because really we don't really give a damn about BTU. So here's what we are seeing. We are seeing that even at 2020, which is, you remember that temporarily the United States will be independent, energy independent, even then we'll end up importing more than $1 billion of oil a day. In this situation, we slowly get worse, even though we continue to grow our natural gas and coal exports. So in terms of BTU, we can export enough natural gas and coal to be equal weighted BTU-wise. But because the huge difference in cost of these BTUs, the little that we import in terms of oil, its price will be more than offset the value that we get by exporting coal and natural gas. Okay, so let's go back here again. And let's see, okay, what would have happened? Let's assume that we, by miracle of miracle, would be able to get to 12 million barrels of oil per day production in the United States. Will that make us energy independent? Well, the answer is no. Because even if we substantially increase production, we are still connected to the world price of oil. And as long as we are still connected to the world price of oil, the U.S. economy is susceptible to oil price shock, okay, which is what we've seen in the 70s and what we've seen in 2008 with the run-up to the main collapse of, to the collapse of the financial markets. So to be energy independent really means to be isolated from oil price shock will only happen if the United States end up being able to set the pricing for oil or for fuels in this case. Okay, so what do we need to do it? What do we need to be in order to be able to set the price of fuel? These are the requirements. To be able to set the price, the world price of oil, you need to be the largest producer. You need to have the lowest cost of production. Okay? Because if you produce fuel for a very high price, then you will not be able to be the price setter below that price. You need to have a large amount of spare capacity. What spare capacity enables you to do is to intervene in the market to release or withhold oil to moderate the price. Okay, so all of this stuff is exactly what OPEC is doing. OPEC is the largest producer, and in OPEC, Saudi Arabia is the largest producer. OPEC has the lowest cost producer, and in it, Saudi Arabia is the lowest cost producer. It has large amount of spare capacity, and it's willing to use the spare capacity to release or withhold the oil in the market to moderate the price. So let's assume that the United States can overtake Saudi Arabia production, so it can become the largest producer. But it fails the second test. The United States oil is too expensive. Hence, the U.S. will not be the lowest cost producer of oil. Okay, tight oil is expensive. Therefore, the United States will not be able to be the price setter in the oil market. Hence, the United States will not be energy independent, regardless of the amount of production. Because it's not important how much oil we produce. We always import the price of oil from OPEC. So, is there no hope for energy independence? So how to achieve energy independence? To become energy independent, you need to reduce our oil consumption by half. So if you remember that graph, if we reduce the oil consumption by half and increase our production, we can, in fact, become independent. Oops, sorry. So how do we do it? We need to replace transportation fuel made from oil with something else. So how do we do it? How can we get to reduce 8 or 9 million barrels of oil per day? So there's enough natural gas to be able to replace about 4 million barrels of oil per day. As a matter of fact, our Board of Advisor member, John Hofmeister, thinks that we might be able to replace even 5 million barrels of oil per day. And we are looking at natural gas here as a feedstock. Natural gas can produce CNG, can produce LNG, and can produce methanol that can run in existing fuels, in existing cars. It can also produce dimethyl ester that could run in diesel trucks. Then we can increase our alcohol production from biomass and trash. And of particular interest is methanol made from trash and from biomass. So unlike ethanol that is made from fermentation, you can make methanol via gasification using chemical industry style processes. And we believe that this can add another 2 million barrels of oil per day, which is commensurate with the amount of ethanol produced today by the corn industry. Then if you look 10 years forward, electric cars will replace about 500,000 barrels of oil per day, and increased efficiency will replace another 500,000 barrels of oil per day. Plus, we are seeing another interesting phenomena, which is continued changes in driving habits. So drivers today are driving less. More people are working from home and telecommuting. And as a result, we are seeing this decrease in demand for transportation in the United States. Altogether, we think this process will continue, and it will also account for about 1 million barrels of oil per day. So here's the interesting thought. So the U.S. is the lowest cost producer of natural gas, of biomass, of trash, and of electricity. It has the capacity to build significant spare capacity in all of them, particularly biomass to methanol. The Department of Energy estimates that there are 1 trillion tons of biomass available for use to make energy that is not used for food. Now, I mean, this is really equivalent to 500 billion gallons of methanol or something ridiculous like that. So it's, 500 billion barrels of methanol. Of course, it's going to take many years to build this capacity, but it's pretty much infinite. The other thing to note is whatever the U.S. does, the world quicks to follow. So the U.S. moved to personal phone, the world moved to personal phones. U.S. moved to iPhones, the world moved to iPhones. And we believe that once the U.S. makes this move, the world will follow, which will further reduce the demand for oil around the world, eventually moderating its price. So the conclusion. The abundance of low-cost feedstocks for competitive fuel will drive down the price of fuel. And it will deflate the power of the cartel to set the pricing, leading to true energy independence. I know it's a short presentation today, but we only had one conclusion to show. Let's open.
Thank you very much, Eyal. I'll help you field the questions here. That was a great presentation. The first question we have here is, how does the Saudi America situation affect the U.S. economy? And this comes from Tina.
Okay. Hi, Tina. Well, I think the increased production of carbohydrates, okay, whether it's oil or natural gas, is a great boon for the U.S. economy by itself. I mean, I'm estimating that it added about $200 to $250 billion to GDP just within the last 5 years since the financial crisis. This very large increase in GDP is, of course, very accretive for the U.S. economy. And we can see this by the way the dollar is reacting. The dollar is getting stronger, which is a good thing because it wards off inflation, which enables the Fed more time to keep accommodating, which enables the economy to keep building. So it's a virtuous circle that is driven by the fact that we have GDP productivity coming from the ground. So the answer is Saudi America is a very good thing for the U.S. economy. Having said that, it still doesn't isolate us from the specter of oil shocks, which is what this talk is about.
All right, thank you, Eyal. The next question comes from Michael, and he asks, since there has always been a large disparity between U.S. consumption versus production, what has caused the price of gas to climb so dramatically?
Well, in one word, China. So basically, here's what's going on in China. McKinsey last year published this report, and they tracked the median household income for a Chinese family. And they then matched it to the next 5 years and the following 5 years plan. So in 2010, only 8% of Chinese earned more than $15,000 a year, which is the level of income that triggers the appetite to buy a vehicle. And this is changing rapidly, where by 2020, McKinsey is expecting that 52% of Chinese families will be able to afford a car. In addition to that, the Chinese drivers don't like small European cars. they are buying large American cars. So the most selling models in China are full-size sedans, minivans, and SUVs. As a result, the Chinese oil consumption is rising rapidly, and that's partly what's keeping the demand for oil going. In addition to that, if you look at the overall world production of oil, the overall world production of oil is pretty much stuck at about 88, 89 million barrels of oil per day. So although the United States oil production has increased, it is more than offset by decrease in production in places like Mexico and other places that have not invested the money that we are investing here to increase production. So these two factors, big growth in demand mainly from China and from the other emerging economies, plus there's one more thing, big growth in demand in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia today is the sixth largest consumer of oil, although they are less than 1% of the world population, way less. They are the sixth largest consumer of oil. They consume more oil than Canada, than France, than Germany. Okay? So as a result, the amount of oil that they are producing, most of it, all the new oil that they are producing that you show in the graph, a lot of it goes to satisfy the internal consumption. It doesn't actually get to the international market. So not only that the world production is not increased by much, the world that is available for trade is decreasing. And because that oil is decreasing, the price is rising.
Great. Thank you, Eyal. The next question we have comes from John, and it's a bit more about the specifics here. He asks, if I had a vehicle converted to run on natural gas, is there any way to refuel my vehicle from the gas running to my home?
And the answer to this is yes, there's supposed to be a way to do it. There's a compressor that one can buy. These compressors have been expensive, and I don't think the technology is quite there yet because there have been problems with maintenance and things like that. But I believe that once this becomes a common phenomenon, then there will come vendors that will actually provide this equipment. So yeah, you need to compress the gas that in your home you get very low pressure natural gas. In the car, you have to run compressed natural gas, which is high pressure of natural gas. So you need to have a compressor to compress the natural gas.
Okay, great. Our next question is, what if nothing changes with regards to oil consumption, oil imports, and oil production in the U.S.?
Oh, this question is loaded. So if we continue the same path and we do absolutely nothing, okay, so basically we'll see increased production that we have been seeing in the last few years. We'll see increased demand from China that we have seen in the last few years, and India, and South America, and Middle East, all these countries that their population is growing rapidly. The price will continue to rise, and as the price rises, larger and larger economies around the world will be priced out. And what's going to happen to them, I mean, think about the world is divided into three, maybe let's just say call it four different categories. So the United States and China are in the top echelon. We've built a very energy-intensive society here, both in the United States, and now they are doing exactly the same thing in China. Very energy-intensive society. So as the price of fuel rises, the United States and China's economy are going to feel the brunt of this. And we can already see it in our middle class and how they're struggling with the cost of fuel. Okay. The second part is, let's call it the European, Canadian, people that have built a society that are not as dependent on low-cost energy. And they are going to fare pretty well, but they start from, particularly if you look at Europe, they start from a much shittier place. So for them, it's going to be harder. Okay. Then there's the rest of the emerging markets. and they just continue to slowly build up. Their build up will be slower, but since they have so many people coming out of poverty, they have lots of low-cost labor that compensate for the lack of cheap energy. And then below them, the 3 billion people that are living on $1.50 a day, those people get completely priced out. So what's happening is the fact that the BRICS have emerged, and they are, plus, Russia and plus countries in the Middle East and oil producers have emerged, driving up the price of fuel or transportable energy. What it did is it created all the people that were behind them that are waiting to emerge. All these people get stuck in the station because they didn't make it to the train. So a good part of our effort here is to reduce the cost of transportable energy, so all these people can also climb the train and move up to prosperity.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions, if that's all right with you, Eyal.
Sure.
The next question comes from Kelly, and the question is, what percentage of new cars being produced in the U.S. are capable of flex fuel consumption with the onboard computer activated to the on position?
Okay, so the big 3 automakers in the United States, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, promised the Congress when GM and Chrysler got the bailout that by this year more than 50% of the cars will be capable of being flex fuel. We think that this probably is a very good estimate for new cars on the road. For new cars on the road, we think that about 50% of the new cars on the road are capable of being flex fuel. However, these cars are not badged and are not tagged in any way to indicate the fact that they can take E85. The only telltale sign is in the VIN number, in the vehicle identification number. The middle letter is a V rather than an I. And V stands for FFV, and it is an indication that the engine and all the other things is already pre-programmed, and the computer is already pre-programmed to be flexible fuel.
Okay, our next question is, how much will these alternative fuels cost me at the pump?
Well, this is always the tough question because it's very, very hard to predict pricing. Okay, to make any prediction is hard, particularly about the future. But here's our thinking. So in terms of the cost of producing, because of the gigantic gap in cost of natural gas, biomass, and coal to the cost of petroleum, and again, we are not advocating creating fuels from coal here, but because of the gigantic spread in price, converting those feedstocks to, say, methanol or ethanol should be relatively inexpensive. Okay, so for example, we've seen a study by Halliburton which said that at current prices of natural gas, it should take between 50 to 60 cents a gallon to make a gallon of methanol. However, that doesn't really mean that in the gas station the cost is going to be 56 a gallon. Instead, what we will see is that the price will somehow track what we're thinking we'll see is the price will somehow track the price of gasoline for a while. However, since these fuels have less caloric value than gasoline, there is an element of inconvenience that is added to fueling. Okay, so if you fuel with methanol, you will have to go maybe 4 times to the gas station a month rather than 3 times to the gas station a month. As a result, it's a little bit less convenient. So because of that, the price of methanol will have to be lower. Because the price is lower, price-sensitive drivers will end up filling with methanol. That will shift the use to methanol. And with that shift to methanol, more and more production will come online, and then there's going to start to be competition between different producers, particularly if you get producers from natural gas, from biomass, municipal trash, and so on. We're going to see competition between producers, and that's a good thing, which will drive down the price further. And then what we'll see is what happened in Brazil, which is, the price of ethanol is set by the price of gasoline, but at the same time, the price of gasoline is also set by the price of ethanol. And they are both tracking lower. And that's what we are hoping to see here.
Great, thank you, Eyal. This last question asks, what would you say is the #1 thing stopping us from achieving energy independence, and what can we as citizens do to move the U.S. forward?
In one word, political willpower. Every president since Richard Nixon told us that this is one of the most important things for their presidency is to have the United States become energy independent. Yet, if you think about where we stand today, we are better, we are producing more oil, but the reality is we are just as exposed. And at $1 billion a day, that's a pretty big exposure. So, for us at Fuel Freedom, we want to open this to the market, okay? We want the market to be able to set the prices. We want to be able to give you competitive fuels, and we want to give you competitive conversion kits, and want to do all of that stuff for less, so it's the right thing for you to do in terms of your family economy. However, this is, I would say, the long way. Congress can, in fact, in a stroke of a keyboard, make all that stuff happen really, really quickly, and the administration. So one thing you guys can all do is call your representatives and your congressmen or women and tell them, senator, and tell them that enough is enough, that it's time to open the fuel market to competition.
Okay, thank you very much, Eyal. That wraps up our discussion for today. Eyal will continue to present more of the Foundation's findings in a new webinar each month, so we hope to see you back here. And we also invite you to participate next week in our online discussion with Professor Robert Zubrin, who will be discussing his book, Energy Victory, and you can find all that information on our website. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for listening in today, and thank Eyal again for his presentation, and we will see you next time. Thank you.